wholeness is the ability to integrate and hold and accept all of my lived experience and not try to hold any one part of myself separate. This is what's interesting about the word doubt. If you go to the Greek, one possible way to interpret that is to separate oneself in a hostile spirit, to be at variance with oneself. So when you hear things like doubt not, whatever in the scriptures, they might be saying more like, hey, don't be at war with yourself.
Welcome back once again to the Sparks of Gratitude podcast, everyone. I am your host, Randy Sparks, and this is going to be a wonderful conversation with a dear friend of mine named Devin Rappleye. Welcome.
Thank you, Randy.
So Devin and I have been friends only actually recently, but we've become, when you meet somebody and you become deep friends quickly through some shared experiences and conversations, and you just feel it. So Devin's become that to me, and Devin is a scientist and a student of both science and spirituality, and sometimes there's a paradox in the two of those, and that's going to be a large part of our conversation, and how sometimes we ourselves are our own experiment.
Yes, that's very true.
And so I'm excited for that. But before we begin, we love you so much. Thank you for listening, watching. Remember, if you haven't yet, click that like button. Or if you're listening to this on an audio platform, if you're listening on audio, did you know that we're also on YouTube and vice versa? Check it out. But we would love it if you could go in and leave us a review. It really helps me and it makes a difference. So anyway, we thank you for that. And now we'll get on with the conversation. So Devin, before we got started, you and I were talking. It was a great conversation. Could you maybe share a little bit about yourself, or at least what's been on your mind that leads to getting this conversation started?
Yeah.
Who are you?
Yes. It's a question we all ask ourselves. And I don't know if any one of us has a complete answer.
Right.
But I am a professor of chemical engineering. I am also deeply religious. Spiritual is probably the more accurate term I would use for myself. And I am a father. I am a loving husband. I am also a recovering pornography addict. I am a believer. I'm a doubter, a questioner. I am a student of science and spirituality, as you mentioned. And I'm all about trying out different modes of living and different modes of investigating the physical world around us to deepen my own understanding of myself and the world around me.
Well, and that's one of the things that makes you so compelling to me and has made our past conversations so interesting, is because what I see in you is a deep, sincere curiosity about almost that childlike excitement in curiosity about discovering something new and finding a new way to understand beyond what you currently understand, and say there's something beyond this, and figuring it out and finding a way. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about that, of what is the objective that you have as a scientist, and how you find knowledge in science versus how you experiment with understanding yourself better. What's similar and what's different, and that maybe we as listeners might resonate with.
Yeah, so we all sort of maybe learned like these textbook models or theories about physics and science, and we sort of have this sense as we learn it. It's taught sort of like cut and dry, right? Like these equations, these E equals mc squared, all of these things that we learn, I sort of had to progress through, because I started using these equations on real life data and observations, and I started realizing, hey, this equation doesn't quite work quite right here. What's wrong with that? Or what's wrong with my experiment, right? But I learned I had to also start to question from the other side too, like, what's wrong with this model, this equation? What is it not capturing that's actually happening in the experiment? And so there's no such thing as a a complete model that works in all situations all the times. In fact, here's a quote from a famous statistician, George Box. He says, "All models are wrong, but some are useful."
And so let me see if I understand what you're explaining correctly for a non-scientist.
Okay.
Is someone like me might think like, oh, well, math is math, and there's a solution, and there's a formula or a model that gets me from here to here, and I know that the answer is correct, right? And much of that might be applied towards scientific experimentation or to conduct experiments and find a result in science. And if I understand you correctly, you're saying, well, we take these models, which we think apply toward conducting this research or experiment, and sometimes that model isn't complete or correct, but it might move us forward.
Right. So it's like if I want to learn something about a system, I have to propose some sort of model to interpret it by. And I may at first observe and be like, hey, this works pretty well. But then I change the conditions. I change the temperature. I change flow rate. I change something about the system. And maybe it doesn't work so well anymore. And I'm like, oh, maybe I didn't capture that variable well enough with this model. And so now I need to modify or tweak the model to account for something I maybe didn't account for before. Probably the best way I could probably tell this story is through the story of how the model of the atom was developed. I mean, what comes to your mind, Randy, when I say an atom? How do you imagine it, visualize it?
Yeah, well, I visualize a drawing of an atom that's kind of got the a nucleus, and then I've got like the lines are around it, kind of representing the flow of the electrons surrounding the nucleus. The stick figure version of an atom, for people to see.
Yeah, and that's a very common image that we have all around us about the atom. But if we go back in time, they initially imagined it as, they call it the plum pudding model. So you had like this soup of different charge, and you had these like little like plums. I don't know if you think of like maybe like a oatmeal raisin cookie or like a blueberry muffin, right? And you have these electrons that are just like the blueberries interspersed throughout, and the mass was just equally distributed throughout and with the charge. And then Rutherford had a student who said, hey, I want to fire some neutrons at this atom, and I want to see if any of them bounce back. We've been measuring and seeing and like on the other side what hits, but we haven't been measuring on the backside. And Rutherford was like, yeah, you can try that, but you're probably not going to see anything because of how they saw the model, they thought that's not possible. And because the mass of an atom was so low and it was distributed all over, it was essentially like looking like at firing a bullet through tissue paper. It's like there's no way the atom's going to stop it because it's just too much energy going through. It's just going to tear right through the tissue. But he did it, and he started seeing signals bouncing back. And Rutherford was surprised, and they scratched their head, and they're like, well, maybe this plum pudding model doesn't work in this situation. And that's when they moved to the model that you described, where you had a dense mass in the middle, the nucleus, with the electrons swirling around it. And so once they had that down, they said, well, if we just hit that dead on, that if all the mass is concentrated there, then it could bounce the neutron back, scatter it backwards. And so that worked for a while. And then when people started studying nuclear fission, they started seeing some chemistry coming out when they take neutrons and fire it at uranium. They keep seeing this like wacky chemistry, and they're like, how do we explain this with the current model of the atom? They couldn't, because they were imagining all of the protons, neutrons, and the nucleus itself as like hard billiard balls that like they're just sort of knocking each other about. Maybe they could chip a little bit off of each other here and there, but they couldn't split each other apart. Like just there was no physics to describe that. And then Niels Bohr came along, and he's like, well, what if the atom nucleus was actually more like a liquid drop? And when I hit it, it'd sort of undulate and jostle around. And maybe once I got these two ends far enough apart, we could have, I guess I need to say this is where Otto Frisch comes in, and Lisa Meitner, and other people, and they took that liquid drop model and they said, hey, if I hit that, if you poke a thing of water and you observe it, you can see it sort of undulates and moves around. And we got two things going on in the nucleus. And this is an interesting paradox, right? I take all these positively charged protons. And what do like charges want to do with each other? They want to repel each other. And so why, and then they're also densely packed in the nucleus. Why don't they just repel each other and fall apart? Well, that's because you got these two forces at play. One is the electric charge, where they're trying to repel each other. The other is what's called the nuclear strong force. And it's the most powerful universe that we've observed scientifically. It's the most powerful force in the universe we've observed scientifically. And it only acts over very, very short distances. So like the protons and the protons and neutrons have to be like right next to each other to do it. But it's so powerful and strong that you can't really, it's really hard to pull it apart, right? But if I have this liquid drop and it starts expanding away from each other, now these guys over here do not have that nuclear strong force. It's dropped really fast. These guys don't either, and they just want to repel each other, and the atom splits. Mm. And so that finally gave a physical explanation for all the chemistry that they were observing.
Right, and so now we've progressed from, to make it oversimplified, 3 different models to progress there.
Yeah.
Where we thought this model was the understanding of the blueberry muffin model.
Yeah.
to the model that we understand, but then that even went further, that helped us understand the nucleus better. And so that model kept changing, and who knows if it will change again where something else is unexplained. Right. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so why is this important?
Okay. So we do this with ourselves, and we do this with each other, and we do this with God. We create these models of how we view ourselves and view others and view our relationship with God. And they have a significant impact on our own well-being. And so I love the idea that I can take what I've seen in science over here and now apply it to myself and my relationship with God and others. I think there's a tendency sometimes to view the spiritual or religious principles and things as like they're static, like they are set in stone. And the problem with that is that they may very well be set in stone, but we are constantly changing our own vantage point. And I don't know if they are or not set in stone, but let's say if it is. If I'm looking at it from over here, then I change to look at it over here, that may look and be totally different to me. Mm-hmm. And so because I am a dynamic person, my relationship with truth, my relationship with God is constantly in flux. And I have to revisit these images or models that I have of God, of spirituality, of truth, in order to accommodate the experiences that I'm having.
Right. And you've described kind of this different vantage point of view. If you're looking at something, there's this famous image kind of describing something like that, where someone's looking at this shape, this object, and depending on one of 3 different angles you're looking at it, it's clearly a circle, or it's clearly a square, or it's clearly a triangle. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, depending on the angle you're looking at it.
Yeah.
And I mean, are you familiar with that? Like, I'll show that to you. And here's another one that hopefully we'll put on YouTube if you can see that, to just depending on this vantage point, because it's this 3-dimensional shape. And if you're looking at it from one side, it looks like one of those shapes. Yeah. So it's really interesting.
Yeah. And this is something you've brought up recently, and that is, in both science and spirituality, doubt and questioning is not the enemy. A sense of certainty is.
Yeah, I love this idea, and so I want to kind of dive in and get that conversation. I read something the other day, a quote that somebody said. So I don't even know who it was. I think it was a random person, and I'm sure a million people have said it before. But what is the opposite of faith? And I might say, well, fear or doubt. And they said, no, I think it's certainty. Now, whether that's true or not, we may define that differently, but I liked how that provoked thought to me, is that, the difference between faith and certainty. And then, well, where does doubt fit into this equation? And my perspective is that, I was raised, I felt like doubt, especially in the context of spirituality or faith, it seemed like doubt was wrong, and not acceptable. And now I feel like doubt is something that I should embrace, because doubt is what is a predecessor to the opportunity to exercise faith. Like, faith doesn't exist without doubt preceding it in a way. Anyhow.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts?
So I'm going to share actually a couple quotes and then my thoughts, because this is shared on both sides in the scientific community and in the spiritual community. So this one's from Richard Feynman. He's a Nobel Prize winner, theoretical physicist. He says, "We absolutely must leave room for doubt, or there is no progress and no learning. People search for certainty, but there is no certainty. Some people say, 'How can you live without knowing?' I do not know what they mean. I always live without knowing. That is easy. How you get to know is what I want to know."
Oh.
So, and then James Fowler, who is a big researcher on faith development, he said, "Only with the death of our previous image or model, as we've been talking, can a new and more adequate one arise. Thus, substantive doubt is a part of the life of faith." And we do have a tendency in faith communities sometimes to sweep doubt under the rug, and that sort of creates this sense of, if I doubt, then I'm less than a believer than these other people. Or we question, is there room for me in this community? Do I still belong if I doubt? Because it's sometimes not part of the conversation in some faith communities.
Right. I love that, and I love the how you brought in Richard Feynman and Fowler, who have kind of the same conceptual idea, but in an approach to science and gaining knowledge, and also the same concept on the spiritual front. I love Richard Feynman, by the way. Probably one of my favorite books that I've ever read in my life was Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman. Yeah. Anyway, if you want a fun read, this guy is like, imagine watching Forrest Gump, except with an actual genius. that his life just takes on this Forrest Gump-like trajectory from what type of life he led, but of course is a Nobel Prize winning physicist.
And I love his intellectual humility.
Yes.
It's like, I know some things, but I'm not certain about anything.
And embracing that and owning that is like, that's what he's seeking, is to continue to. Anyway, I love that. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. So an odd thing happens though, right? As we allow room for doubt and questioning, as they mentioned in these quotes, it's like, it actually allows for the expansion of oneself, not for the loss of oneself. Like we get afraid that if we allow ourselves to doubt or question, that we are going to lose our sense of self, because, and I guess maybe this is where we brought up Fowler, is a good point to bring up. We've talked about a scientific model. Now let's talk about some spiritual models, right? We sort of start from this point where like, oh, I'm going to try believing something. And then we have like this epiphany moment and we're like, yes, I knew it was true. And now I'm going to live a dedicated life of faith. I'm going to endure to the end and keep the faith. And we sort of see it as like, you got to be this stalwart, sure and certain person in order to be good at maintaining your faith or enduring to the end or whatever. And that's a very static model to me. I mean, it's dynamic in the beginning, but then all of a sudden it's like, and now that you've arrived, man, you're now static where you're at. And Fowler actually introduces a different model that actually has been really helpful for me to allow space for my experience.
Ooh, we've got handouts.
So I got a little handout here, and maybe you can post an image of it or a link to it. I can send it to you. But there's basically, he models faith. He studied tons of people's lives. He studied psychological and social development, and then his contribution was, I'm now going to see how faith development fits inside of all these different personal development models. And he starts out with stage 1. It's an intuitive projective faith. It's usually toddler to preschool age. It's defined mostly by parental behavior and attitudes, and they really have a hard time differentiating between fantasy and reality. It's all the same to them. And then stage 2 is the mythical literal, and this is like school aged. You start to think logically, but you understand the stories of your faith community in extremely literal ways. So in Genesis, it's like God created the world in 6 days. It's like, and it's literal in their minds, like, oh, 6 days He created the world. And then me as a scientist, I eventually arrive and find out, oh, there's all this geological evidence and evidence in the universe that it's like millions and billions of years old. And it's like, that doesn't fit in my mythical, literal faith. And so then there's a stage 3, which is synthetic conventional. And in this stage, you accept the authority of your faith tradition. And so if you came out of that mythical, literal, and you saw the Bible as the authority, right, you then have to trust that it took 6 days to make the world. And so while you're in this stage 3 of synthetic conventional faith, you find it difficult to think outside of your own faith box, right? But then stage 4 comes along, individual reflective, and I've described this where I learned, it took millions and billions of years, possibly, to make the universe and the earth. And you begin to critically examine and question your beliefs. And you see that there's actually other boxes than your own. And you're like, well, how does this all fit? And so during the stage, you often become disillusioned with your religious traditions. And that may ultimately lead to you leaving your faith, or you may just become disengaged within your own faith community. And this was the most hopeful part to me, is like, there's actually more stages beyond stage 4, right? So you don't just have to lose your faith. There's a conjunctive faith. There's a stage 5, and it says this usually happens in adulthood. It's pretty rare before middle age for it to happen. People begin to recognize the limits of logic and accept paradox. So in stage 4, I'm thinking very logically. I'm like, okay, things got to make sense. Things got to connect. And because I'm critically analyzing and I want things to sort of start making sense. But then I do that for a while and I go, you know what? Like, it doesn't matter. Science. And the more I dive into science, the more I realize, there's paradox and things don't make sense in there either. Just like we talked about with the electronic charges and the strong force within that nucleus that makes up everything around us. There's a paradox contained inside of that nucleus, right? And so you often return back to your sacred stories, your faith community, but now you have an appreciation for mystery.
In this stage 5.
In this stage 5. Yeah. And so you're okay with paradox. You're okay with mystery. You're okay with not being certain. And then stage 6, which is universalizing faith, which is pretty rare for anyone to really achieve. This is like Jesus, Mother Teresa, Gandhi. They often become martyrs because they challenge their communities so much and how they view the world and each other. And so those who reach this final rare stage are able to fully integrate their faith into their lives, serving others and valuing community over self. And so to me, this is a more dynamic model. It allows for more complexity, so it can house more of my own lived experience, and I'm able to map to it easier. And I don't feel like, for example, with the old one, when I was trying to keep the faith, and I kept having these persistent doubts and questions coming up, I would keep comparing myself to that model. And there's 2 things we got to question when that happens. Is I either have to question the model, or I have to question whether the data or my experience is valid, right? And it was because I saw so many people talking and speaking and living according to this model, and it was working for them, I was like, well, then I must be the one that's wrong and broken. But come to find out, when I got exposed to this model, I was like, wait, there is space for me. I can live a life of faith while having serious doubts and questions unresolved. It's okay to experience the mystery of faith.
And I like how you describe that it's okay to experience the mystery and you still belong. There's a place for you.
Yeah.
So maybe tell me a little bit more about that. Like, why is that so important to you? Like, how does that fit in your life?
So I learned from Tony Overbay that when someone begins to lose their sense of belonging in their faith community, that is actually when they start to lose their faith. And so so often you can see explanations of like, they just weren't faithful enough. They just weren't. But it's actually like, as soon as I stop seeing that I can fit somewhere, I go and look somewhere else for answers. And so for me, it's really important to be able to see myself belonging somewhere and allow others to see that they belong, because they might not stick around. And there's a couple paths you can take when you get to stage 4, when you start questioning and doubting. You could say, see ya, I'm going to find my answers somewhere else. And we have to accept that all the information we get in life is somehow biased, right? It's coming at us from some angle. It's never like distilled, pure truth coming at us. And outside of a faith community, you can run into a lot of cynicism, and that doesn't serve anyone well. And staying and holding the tension has allowed me to expand myself and my faith and my own image or model of God. Whereas leaving, it would have shrunk or stayed static or whatever. I never would have experienced this new relational wholeness that I can with God.
Yeah. Okay. So you said 2 things there that mean something to me: expansion and wholeness. So could you expand on that? What does that mean to you?
Okay. So I'm going to share another quote now.
I'm glad you did your homework. You came prepared.
So this is from Father Gregory Boyle. He's a very powerful spiritual thought leader for me. I get a lot of inspiration from his work. He says, God can get tiny if we're not careful. I'm certain we all have an image of God that becomes the touchstone, the controlling principle to which we return when we stray. And he goes on in the book Tattoos on the Heart to explain how he imagined himself just outside the reaching fingertips of God. Like, God loves us, but I'm somehow just outside of the us. And then he described, well, then I had to accept, well, God loves me. And I sort of just imagined God like, okay, well, if I have to, I'll love you, right?
And is this you having this, or is this him
this
describing?
is Father Gregory Boyle describing his experience. But I love it so much because it's my own experience. Yeah. And then you say, okay, well, if you insist, God, you love me too. But then he says, well, then who can explain the next moment when the utter fullness of God rushes in on you? When you completely know the one in whom you move and live and have your being, you see then that it has been God's joy to love you all along. And this is completely new. So he moved from being outside of God's love to being begrudgingly inside of God's love to being like fully embraced, and like it's God's delight to love me. So you can see how that image or model of God shifted for him over time. And he quotes Meister Eckhart, who says, God is greater than God. And he goes on, Father Gregory Boyle goes on and says, the hope is that our sense of God will grow as expansive as our God is. Each tiny conception gets obliterated as we discover more and more the God who is always greater. God, I guess, is more expansive than every image we think rhymes with God. How much greater is the God we have than the one we think we have? And so to me, that's what I love about science. That's what I love about spirituality is I get to obliterate all of my tiny conceptions about myself, the world around me, and God is ultimately how I relate to all of those things, right? It's through God that I have my lens set for the world. So this is where I think gratitude plays a crucial role in our lives. Because gratitude, I think, is the highest form of acceptance, and acceptance brings us to wholeness. And it is through the acceptance of ourselves and our lived experiences, good, bad, ugly, that we find our wholeness.
So what does wholeness mean to you?
Okay. Yeah, so we've brought it back to wholeness. In the scriptures, it talks about be therefore perfect, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's one conception we could have of wholeness. It's like, I am perfect. I am without flaw, right? I'm flawless. But to me, that's not wholeness. To me, wholeness is the ability to integrate and hold and accept all of my lived experience and not try to hold any one part of myself separate. And this is what's interesting about the word doubt, is if you go to the Greek for the word doubt, one possible way to interpret that is to separate oneself in a hostile spirit, to be at variance with oneself. So when you hear things like doubt not or whatever in the scriptures, they might be saying more like, hey, don't be at war with yourself.
Interesting. Yeah, I like that. And a moment ago, you applied that to where we might scripturally hear, be perfect without flaw. That may be an interpretation of that. I've heard someone teach that a Greek translation of perfect is teleos or something like that. And what that definition might be is that it's something that serves the measure of its creation in a way.
Yeah, complete.
It's complete, right? Which includes its, if you imagine a tree that's grown and it's scarred from weather and it's worn and branches are broken or it may look weathered and scratched and scarred, but it's also complete, perfect, teleos, right? Not without flaw,
right?
But complete,
right?
So, okay.
So that is what I mean by wholeness.
Okay.
And even sometimes when we use the word complete, we may think of like a polished or finished product. And that again,
finished,
right? But I believe, and I know through my own personal experience, that as I accept the broken, unwanted, and despised parts of myself, that is when I reach a place of wholeness. And so in accepting my brokenness, I am made whole. And in becoming whole, I am now progressing.
And so tell me a little bit about that. We've talked about this before, and it's really changed the way I look inward at myself, where I often feel like there's parts of me that I'm ashamed of, that I don't want other people to see or know about, that I don't want to admit are parts of me now or who the person I'm striving to become. And so I set myself out as this is the Randy that the public sees, but there's these shameful mistakes and these parts of me that I'm like, you stay behind the curtain.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but then I feel this tension and dissonance between this is the version of me that I put out there to show people, and I get on a podcast and I talk to people and I present myself as I'm hopefully an interesting person and have good questions for people, and I want to provoke a conversation where I have deeply embarrassing flaws and I don't want to admit that that's part of the real me.
Yeah. So I shared in the introduction, we haven't touched on this much yet, that I'm a recovering pornography addict, and I can talk about that openly. I never was. I wasn't like that all the time. In fact, for the first couple years of recovery, I was like, I didn't want, in fact, my idea of recovery was I'm going to squash this addict and completely eradicate it from me. And that's when I'll be recovered, and I'm using the past tense there, right? And I often try to make sure that I say I'm a recovering addict, right? Like I'm in the process, I'm engaging in that dynamic development of myself. And so it took a couple of years. And in fact, I remember an experience where I attended support groups, and I left one of the support groups and I was in the parking lot, and it was at a church building and there was lots of other activities going on. And someone I knew came out and saw me, and I was holding the 12-step guide, and he asked me, he's like, "Hey, what are you doing here?" And I was like, I'm caught red-handed. I'm like, I can either lie or I can tell the truth. And I told the truth. I was like, hey, I go to the 12-step support group. And his response to me was, those are the best meetings. And I was like, oh. And that was like one of the key moments I remember of like moving towards this acceptance, right? It's like, well, if he can still accept me knowing that I have this addiction, maybe I can start to accept myself. And that's a lot of what I experienced in the support groups. I would see people who were okay with themselves and they'd share the things they're doing, and I would try them, and I started slowly becoming more okay with myself. Now, years into the recovery, I've become a very vocal person about addiction because it's a part of my life that I am now grateful for. Like that was another big step. And so that's, again, great gratitude being the highest form of acceptance, right? When I finally got to the point where I could say, I'm grateful for my addiction, that's when I was really in this place of wholeness, because I could see how the addiction, I guess there's two components. One, I could see how the addict in me was really just trying to do his best to like manage stress, manage boredom, manage loneliness, all these things that were difficult to deal with. The addict was like, hey, I know how to take care of that. I know how to take care of you. And it took me waking up and realizing, hey, you know what? Yeah, you are taking care of me, but you're not really leading me towards what I truly value. And so the second part of that gratitude arises from the fact that maybe if I didn't have this addiction, I never would have woken up to what I truly value. And the chance of me possibly losing what I value and knowing that that's constantly going to be a possibility because of my addiction really sharpens my focus on my values and keeps me committed towards living in a direction that leads towards my values.
And so thank you for sharing that, because that's deeply personal.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I will comment on, well, first, I'm recovering from the exact same addiction. And so I feel you, I hear you. Mm-hmm. It's a very challenging, embarrassing, shameful. I feel all those feelings.
Yeah.
And part of this process is trying to accept and love that version of myself and what that's permitted me to become, or how you've described right now. Yeah. And something I'll comment on is, like, I honor so much your voice in sharing that, because often I hear people describe, I'm a recovering, alcoholic, and people embrace and celebrate. Yet when somebody shares that they're a recovering pornography addict, it's kind of like, ugh.
Yeah. Creeper.
Like, why don't we celebrate that recovery like the others? And maybe that's cultural, but whatever that may be.
Yeah.
And so it means something to me. But in either case, what I hear from you is saying, well, rather than extinguishing this piece of you, you've embraced and loved that part of you, and that wholeness expands.
Right.
That wholeness is the expansion.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so, the whole recovery journey has forced me to expand and accept more parts of myself. And it may seem counterintuitive, as you were saying, like, to accept and love this part of yourself. That's the path to recovery. That's the path to wholeness. When, like, as you mentioned, it's a very taboo and emotionally charged topic. And so we often have strong reactionary feelings towards it of disgust or uncomfortability, whatever it might be. And so that makes it really difficult to see that, like, well, if I accept and love this part of myself, and we come to find as we accept and love that part of ourselves that the pornography addiction was just a symptom. It was actually a solution that we were trying to resolve this underlying gap or hole or problem that we weren't willing to accept about ourselves. So for me, like, acting out on my pornography addiction wasn't about, like, anything sexual at all. It was actually about trying to not feel abandoned, or trying to not feel like a failure, or trying not to feel and experience these things that I couldn't accept about myself. And so as I loved that addict part of myself, all these layers started coming off, and I saw under there just this scared child that I could hold and love and be like, oh, Devin, I know that you hurt deeply, and I love you, and I care for you. And that sounds weird talking to myself, but it also is deeply healing. And so the ability to get honest with ourselves and be present with what we're feeling and experiencing allows that acceptance and that expansion. And sometimes that expansion feels glorious and it's just so joyful. And other times it hurts badly because the stretching is just, it's a workout, an emotional, spiritual workout.
Yeah, I appreciate that stretching and the effort that goes into that. And I know that you, just because we've talked about it before, but there's different versions of myself that I've been ashamed of, or, that I'm like, that this isn't the version of me that I kind of present myself out as. Mm-hmm. Accepting all of those. One of them might be kind of the addiction. One of them might be, mistreating somebody, or whatever it is in my life. Like all these versions of my evolution in life to my current present state. Many people that are listening might share that same addiction.
Yeah.
Or may not have ever even it may not have ever crossed their mind, but have some other version of themselves that they struggle with, that they hide, that they mask. And my hope is that listeners today, that as you listen, that this might help you consider what expansion and wholeness and loving and embracing all those versions of yourself, how that acceptance, gratitude, acceptance, wholeness can actually help become a more impactful, better version of yourself.
Yeah. And so I guess I got a couple other tidbits here that I'll share that sort of touch on what we've just been talking about. And that is, Gregory Boyle says in his book, The Whole Language, he says, we are saved by the people we despise. He's actually quoting St. Gregory there. He says, the very people we disparage, the folks who create disease within us, cause us to recoil, flee, to become defensive. The very people we disparage for disagreeing with us or on polar opposites of the spectrum, turns out these are our teachers and salvation. We seek this luminous union with the one who is outside, the despised one. And that one who's outside, that despised one, can frequently be ourselves, holding ourselves at variance with oneself, in a hostile spirit, right, as we talked. So one of the things I do to manage these, to cope with these uncomfortable feelings, especially when the expansion is stretching and it's painful. And let me just say, like, the listeners or whoever might be like, why the heck would I want to ever do this expansion business if it's so painful? But as I mentioned, I also experienced some of the most joyous and moments of my life doing it. It's also, I would much prefer this pain that I experience with expansion than the pain that I experienced when I was in my addiction or when I'm in my self-pitying or in my self-loathing, where it's painful and I'm just contracting. I'm just shrinking, right? And so the hope for me when I'm in these painful moments is that at least this is leading to something, to growing into something more. And when I get out the other end, it's all going to be better for it rather than this hopeless hole, which, by the way, that's what James Fowler says is the opposite of faith, is hopelessness, the inability to conceive of any meaning, right? So, but I guess going back to my coping strategy is I write, and sometimes I write poetry. And so I'm going to put myself out there. This is one of my original compositions, and it sort of touches on this idea of expanding to accept oneself. And it's called Dark Clouds. It says, today starts with a clear blue sky. I feel so light as though I could fly. I'm going to be good today. I'm going to love and pray. I'm going to help and play. I'm going to give myself away. I soar with my kids through breakfast. I swoop to hug and hold them fast. I climb higher. My expectations rise as I get to work, but then a surprise. Oh, this one's not a problem at all. I know who can help. I make a call. I soar on and pick up speed. I'll soon have the help I need. No help comes. Clouds appear. I can figure this out. No fear. The air gets rough, but I still fly. A need there and here I spy. Help, help, I both hear and cry. I begin to dart from side to side. As clouds gather, but I stride. Too many needs, I set mine aside. I falter and fall quickly through the sky. Help, I cry, but I hear no reply. Clouds billow, darken and break. A crack of thunder, my wings ache. I slowly roll home as rain pours out. Was I good today? I begin to doubt. I still try, but quick as lightning I strike. Those I love most, I feel my shame spike. As the thunder claps back, hate, hate. I try to resist and reset, but it's too late. I spiral in shame, but I can only hate me to block the storm from those I love greatly. I rumble and rage in inner turmoil. How did I get here, ready to boil? I know how to be better. I know how to fly, but I am now the dark clouds in the sky. Yet life needs dark clouds to break and pour their rain into a river or lake. Without them, it would be barren, dry. Life would have no chance to thrive. And so I hope that you saw the progression in there of what we often start in these good places and some life happens, right? And we shift to this inner turmoil with shame. But when we come to accept that this inner turmoil, this shame, these billowing dark clouds, actually, if we go through them and accept them and treat them with tenderness, it leads to a more abundant life.
Acceptance, wholeness, expansion. This is beautiful, Devin.
Thank you.
Devin, this means so much to me that we could have this conversation. And I'm excited to continue it. And I'm so grateful that we could share this conversation with other people that listen. I really hope that you enjoyed this and it was meaningful to you listening. It was very meaningful to me. It was very personal for both you and me. And as I continue to join you in striving for wholeness, acceptance, and completeness rather than perfection, meaning without flaw. And I hope we can all join together in moving toward that. accept all parts of ourself. So thank you.
Thank you, Randy. It's a privilege to be a part of the conversation with you. And I look forward to continuing this journey with you.
Yep. Thank you, Devin. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Until next time, the Sparks Gratitude Podcast. We love you.